Welcome to Grandpa's Gentle Sleep Stories. If tonight your mind feels a little too busy, a little too awake, you're in the right place. You don't need to quiet your thoughts. You don't need to sort them out. These stories are here to sit beside you while your thinking slowly runs out of steam. So get comfortable. There's nothing to figure out as the story begins. Night has already arrived, even if your thoughts haven't caught up to it yet. The room is still, settled into the kind of quiet that only comes after the day has fully stepped away. Outside, things have slowed. Inside, though, the mind continues, moving as if the day never clearly ended. Thinking doesn't stop just because the lights are dimmed. Thoughts arrive one after another, not loudly, not urgently, but persistently. Small details resurface without explanation. A conversation from earlier replays itself, slightly different each time. A decision that didn't seem important during the day suddenly feels worth revisiting. None of it demands action, yet none of it quite leaves. You're resting now, even if the mind hasn't noticed yet. The body has already begun to let go. Muscles that carried you through the day no longer need to hold anything up. There's a gentle heaviness there, a comfortable weight that signals effort is no longer required. You don't need to adjust or prepare. Rest has already started. The mind, however, keeps working out of habit. It moves from one thought to the next without direction, as if it's checking whether anything has been missed. A memory surfaces, then fades. Another takes its place. Some thoughts repeat, not because they're important, but because they're familiar. The night doesn't mind this. There's no rule that says thinking must stop right away. Minds that spend the day active don't switch off instantly. They slow gradually, one small shift at a time. The night understands this and gives you space. Breathing continues quietly in the background, steady and unremarkable. Each breath comes and goes without effort. You don't need to guide it. It has already found its rhythm. Thoughts keep moving, but they begin to feel slightly less sharp. They don't press as hard as they did earlier. A thought may appear clearly, then lose its shape halfway through. Another might arrive already fading, as if it isn't sure it wants to stay. This is how slowing begins. The room remains unchanged as this happens. Darkness rests gently over everything, softening edges and smoothing shapes. Shadows stay where they are. Nothing shifts or reacts. Without new input, the mind has nothing fresh to work with. It returns instead to leftover fragments from the day, reusing them, turning them over slowly. Repetition takes energy, even if it doesn't feel tiring yet. Each repeated thought carries a little less strength than the one before it. The mind doesn't realize this right away. It keeps going out of momentum rather than need. You don't need to intervene. The story is here simply to accompany you, not to lead you anywhere. You don't need to follow it closely. Words can drift past the same way thoughts do, noticed briefly, then released. The night doesn't ask for attention. Your body sinks a little deeper now, settling more fully into stillness. The surface beneath you feels supportive, steady. There's nothing to hold up, nothing to brace for. Thoughts continue, but they feel slightly farther away now, as if they're happening just outside your awareness rather than directly inside it. This distance makes them easier to ignore. A thought begins, then trails off. Another starts, then changes direction halfway through. The mind doesn't seem as confident about what it's trying to do anymore. That's all right. Time feels different here. Not slower exactly, but less noticeable. Minutes stretch without being counted. The night doesn't measure itself, and neither do you. Thinking continues, but it's losing its sense of purpose. Thoughts arrive, hover briefly, then leave without conclusion. They don't resolve anything. They simply pass through. The room stays quiet. Darkness remains steady. Nothing interrupts this gentle unwinding. Breathing continues, smooth and automatic. You may notice it briefly and forget about it again. It doesn't mind being ignored. Thoughts keep appearing, but they're thinner now, lighter. They don't carry the same weight or urgency. Some dissolve almost as soon as they arrive. The mind begins to realize slowly that nothing is being asked of it. The day is over. Whatever needed thinking about has already been thought about enough. Tonight doesn't require review or correction. The mind may not fully accept this yet, but it's starting to loosen its grip. The story remains calm and steady, unchanging. It doesn't introduce anything new. It doesn't demand engagement. It simply stays with you, offering a consistent presence as the night deepens. Listening becomes easier when nothing important is happening. Thoughts still move, but the movement feels softer. Instead of jumping sharply, they drift. Instead of forming clear lines, they blur slightly at the edges. Pauses begin to appear, brief at first. Small moments where no thought arrives at all. They pass quickly, but they're noticeable enough to feel different. Those pauses don't need to be filled. The night rests comfortably in them. Your body responds by relaxing. Further, weight spreads evenly. Sensation fades slightly, becoming less detailed, less demanding. Thinking hasn't stopped, but it no longer feels in control. It continues because it always has, not because it needs to. The room remains unchanged. The darkness holds steady. Nothing draws attention back. Thoughts continue to appear, but they're less organized now. They cross paths, overlap briefly, then scatter. The mind doesn't bother sorting them. The night allows this looseness. The story continues quietly, moving at the pace of the night rather than the pace of thought. Words arrive and leave without asking to be remembered. You can listen, or you can let go. Both are fine. And as thinking continues in this unhurried way, not yet ready to stop, but already beginning to lose its momentum, thoughts start to branch outward in more directions at once, overlapping and wandering freely as the night settles in more fully around them. And as thoughts begin to move everywhere at once, no longer lining up or leading anywhere specific, the mind slowly gives up trying to follow them, letting them scatter without resistance. Letting them scatter without resistance. Thoughts no longer appear on their own. They arrive linked together, one leading softly into the next, forming gentle chains that move without effort or intention. A small idea brings along another, which quietly makes room for the next one to follow. Nothing pushes this movement forward. It happens simply because the mind is still awake enough to notice itself. There's no clear starting point. A thought appears, then another grows from it, not as a conclusion, but as a continuation. The mind doesn't decide where to go. It follows whatever connection happens to appear, stepping from one idea to the next without stopping to consider why. This movement feels familiar. The night allows it without interruption. There's nothing in the room asking for attention, nothing new to respond to. Darkness remains even and calm, giving the mind space to wander along its own quiet paths. Breathing continues steadily in the background, slow and automatic. Each breath comes and goes without signaling anything else to happen. The rhythm remains unchanged, patient and dependable. Thoughts continue to link together. A memory leads to another memory. A detail brings up something related, then something only loosely connected. The mind doesn't question these connections. It simply follows them. There's no urgency here. Each thought feels light, almost provisional, as if it's only visiting briefly before moving on. Nothing demands resolution. Nothing insists on being finished. The body remains deeply at rest. Weight feels settled and supported. Muscles stay relaxed, unmoving. Sensation fades slightly, becoming less detailed, less insistent. Thinking continues anyway. The chains of thought grow longer, but also softer. Each link feels less distinct than the one before it. Instead of clear steps, there's a gentle flow from one idea to the next. Like drifting along a quiet current, the story moves alongside this flow, steady and calm. Words arrive slowly and leave without expectation. You don't need to follow them closely. They can pass by just like thoughts do. Listening becomes lighter. The night doesn't ask you to keep track. It doesn't reward attention or punish distraction. It simply stays, allowing awareness to move however it needs to. Thoughts continue to lead into one another, but they're losing their sharpness. Connections feel looser now, less deliberate. A thought may trail off halfway through, replaced by something only vaguely related. The mind doesn't seem concerned by this. Time feels less structured here. There's no sense of how long one chain of thought lasts before another begins. Everything blends together, forming a continuous stream without edges. The room remains unchanged. Shadows stay where they are. Nothing moves. This stillness gives the mind nothing to anchor itself to, nothing to organize around. Without structure, thinking grows more fluid. A thought leads to another, then another, but the links are weaker now. The chain bends easily, sometimes breaking altogether, leaving a brief space before the next idea arrives. These spaces don't feel empty. They feel like gentle pauses, moments where the mind rests without realizing it's doing so. The chain resumes afterward, but with less momentum than before. The story continues quietly, offering a steady presence without pulling attention forward. Words drift by at the same slow pace, sometimes noticed, sometimes not. The mind follows its own paths. Thoughts grow more repetitive now, not in content, but in pattern. Each one leads to the next in the same soft way, without urgency or direction. The mind isn't trying to solve anything. It's simply moving because movement feels familiar. This repetition costs energy. Even if it's subtle, each new thought carries a little less strength than the one before it. The chain continues, but it grows lighter, easier to interrupt. The body sinks further into rest. Weight spreads evenly. There's no signal to adjust or respond. Everything that needed movement has already had it. Breathing remains steady, barely noticeable. You don't need to guide it. It happens on its own, like everything else now. Thoughts begin to drift more slowly. The links between them stretch out, leaving more space. Sometimes a thought appears, then nothing follows immediately. The mind doesn't rush to fill that gap. The night holds these pauses gently, without comment. It doesn't treat them as interruptions. They're simply part of the flow now. The story fades slightly into the background. Words register more as sound than meaning. Listening becomes optional. Thoughts still connect, but the chains are shorter now. One idea may lead to another, then stop. The mind rests briefly before continuing. This slowing feels natural. The room remains quiet and unchanged. Darkness stays soft and even. Nothing draws attention back or pulls awareness forward. Thoughts continue to appear, but they feel less personal now. They happen at a slight distance, as though they're passing by rather than happening directly to you. This distance makes them easier to let go of. The chains of thought loosen further. Links dissolve more quickly. Sometimes a thought arrives without leading anywhere at all. The mind allows this without concern. Silence appears more often now, slipping between thoughts without effort. These quiet moments don't feel like gaps. They feel like resting places. The story continues calmly, unhurried, matching the pace of the night rather than the pace of thinking. You don't need to stay with it. Awareness drifts gently within this flow. It notices thoughts without following them closely. It allows chains to form and dissolve without interference. The night deepens quietly. Thoughts grow thinner now. When one leads to another, the connection feels faint, almost optional. The chain breaks easily, leaving quiet behind. The mind doesn't try to rebuild it. Rest settles in further. The body remains still. Breathing remains steady. Everything continues without instruction. Thoughts still arrive, but they no longer form long sequences. They appear, connect briefly, and fade, leaving the mind resting more often in silence. And as these gentle chains continue to weaken, with each thought leading less firmly into the next, the habit of constant connection begins to soften, allowing ideas to drift apart, opening space for something quieter to settle in. And as thoughts lose their need to link together, repetition begins to feel less interesting, inviting the mind to slow its familiar circling and rest more often between ideas. Inviting the mind to slow its familiar circling and rest more often between ideas. The mind has its habits, and one of them is returning to places it already knows. Thoughts revisit moments, conversations, small details that have been passed through many times before. They don't arrive with new information. They return because they remember the path. A thought circles back, and another follows. The movement feels automatic now. The mind doesn't decide to revisit anything. It simply notices that it's there again, standing in the same mental space it visited earlier. The feeling is familiar, almost routine. There's nothing urgent about it. These thoughts don't ask to be solved. They don't offer anything new. They simply replay, as if checking whether anything has changed since the last time they passed through. Nothing has. The night allows this repetition without comment. It doesn't hurry the mind along. It doesn't interrupt. The room remains quiet and unchanged, offering no new details for the mind to latch onto. Breathing continues softly in the background, steady and even. It moves without instruction, unaffected by the mind's circling. The rhythm remains calm, dependable. Thoughts return again, but with less energy this time. Each repetition feels slightly thinner than the one before it. The edges are softer. The center is less clear. The mind notices this, faintly. Revisiting takes effort, even when it happens out of habit. Each time a thought loops back, it carries a little less momentum. The mind doesn't stop the loop, but it doesn't fuel it either. You don't need to interfere. The story continues quietly alongside this motion, steady and unchanging. Words arrive and leave without asking to be remembered. You don't need to hold on to them. They're here simply to keep you company. The night doesn't require attention. Thoughts continue to circle, but the loops grow shorter now. Instead of traveling the full path, they turn back early, as if losing interest halfway through. A familiar idea appears, then fades before completing itself. This shortening feels natural. The body remains deeply at rest. Weight feels settled and supported. Muscles stay relaxed, with no urge to move or adjust. Sensation fades slightly, becoming less detailed, less insistent. Time feels less noticeable here. There's no sense of how long these thoughts have been circling or how long they will continue. The night doesn't mark progress. Thoughts revisit again, but now they feel distant, as though they're happening somewhere slightly removed. You're aware of them without being involved. This distance makes repetition easier to ignore. The mind begins to lose interest in retracing the same paths. It still does it, out of habit, but with less commitment. A thought returns, then drifts away more quickly than before. The night holds this change gently. The room remains unchanged. Darkness stays soft and even. Shadows rest where they've landed. Nothing shifts or reacts. Without fresh input, the mind has nothing new to add to these familiar loops. It repeats what it already has, but repetition alone isn't very engaging. Energy continues to drain quietly. Thoughts return again, but they feel hollow now. They pass through the same space without filling it. The mind notices the familiarity and moves on more easily. Pauses appear, more often between these loops, small moments where nothing returns at all. These pauses don't feel empty. They feel like brief rests, unnoticed until they're already gone. The story continues calmly, offering a steady presence without pulling attention forward. Listening becomes lighter, less deliberate. You don't need to track anything. Thoughts revisit once more, but they don't stay long. They seem aware that they've been here before, that there's nothing left to explore. They fade quickly, leaving quiet behind. The mind doesn't try to call them back. Breathing remains steady, soft and unremarkable. Each breath flows easily into the next. You may notice it briefly, then forget about it again. Repetition continues to lose its appeal. The loops grow weaker now. A thought may begin to circle, then stop abruptly, as if deciding it's not worth the effort. The mind rests briefly before anything else appears. These resting moments grow longer. The night supports them quietly, holding the stillness without interruption. There's no need to fill the silence. It's comfortable on its own. The body sinks a little deeper into rest. Weight feels evenly distributed. Sensation fades further into the background. Thoughts are now infrequent and faint. When one returns, it feels distant and incomplete. It doesn't pull attention. It dissolves easily. The mind seems content to let go. The story remains present but unobtrusive. Words drift by slowly, sometimes noticed, sometimes not. Meaning matters less now than rhythm and tone. Time continues to lose its shape. Moments blend together without distinction. The night unfolds without markers. Thoughts revisit one last time, but with almost no energy left. The loop barely forms before it fades, leaving behind a longer stretch of quiet. The mind rests in that quiet without comment. Repetition no longer feels necessary. Familiar paths remain unused. The mind doesn't search for them. That silence settles more fully now, wrapping gently around awareness. It doesn't push thoughts away. It simply remains when they don't return. The night stays patient. The story continues softly, but it feels farther away now, like a sound heard from another room. You don't need to stay with it. It will remain whether you're listening or not. Awareness drifts gently within this calm. There's no urgency, no direction, no need to stay alert. And as the habit of revisiting everything continues to fade, with each familiar path growing less inviting, the mind begins to allow thoughts to blur together instead, no longer standing apart, easing naturally toward a quieter, less defined state. And as repetition loses its pull, individual thoughts begin to overlap and soften, their edges fading as the night allows them to blend quietly together. Allowing them to blend quietly together, thoughts no longer arrive as separate things. They don't announce themselves or take turns. Instead, they overlap gently, one sliding into another without a clear boundary. What once felt like many individual ideas now feels more like a single soft movement. Slow and indistinct, the mind doesn't try to separate them anymore. A thought begins. Then another overlaps it before the first one finishes. Neither one feels important enough to stand on its own. They blend together, forming something vague and unstructured, more like a feeling than a thought. This blurring feels natural. The night supports it easily. Darkness smooths everything it touches, inside and out. The room remains quiet and unchanged, offering no sharp edges for the mind to cling to. Breathing continues softly in the background. Each breath flows into the next, without pause or emphasis. The rhythm is steady, calm, and barely noticeable. Thoughts continue to move, but they've lost their clarity. Instead of distinct ideas, there are impressions. Instead of sentences, there are fragments. They pass through without demanding attention or completion. You don't need to understand them. The story continues quietly alongside this softening. Words arrive slowly and leave just as easily. Meaning becomes less important than sound and rhythm. Listening grows easier as there's less to follow. The mind seems relieved. Without the pressure to keep thoughts organized, it relaxes further. It allows ideas to drift together, overlapping freely. Nothing insists on being finished. Nothing demands a conclusion. Time feels less structured now. Moments blend into one another, just like the thoughts do. There's no clear sense of progression, no awareness of how long anything has been happening. The body remains deeply at rest. Weight feels settled and evenly supported. Muscles stay relaxed, unmoving. Sensation fades slightly, becoming less detailed, less demanding. Thoughts blur further. What once felt like noise now feels like a soft hum in the background. It's there, but it doesn't interfere. It doesn't compete for attention. It simply exists, quiet and unobtrusive. The night holds this hum patiently. The room stays the same. Shadows remain where they are. Nothing shifts or reacts. This stillness gives the mind no reason to sharpen its focus. Without contrast, everything softens. A thought may appear briefly, then dissolve into another before it can be recognized. Sometimes it's hard to tell whether a thought happened at all. There's only a faint trace, quickly gone. This lack of clarity feels comfortable. The story remains present, but unobtrusive. Words drift through like distant sounds, noticed only if attention happens to pass by them. You don't need to stay with them. They'll continue either way. Awareness begins to loosen its grip. Instead of focusing on individual things, it rests lightly over everything at once. There's no need to zoom in or sort through details. Everything blends together into a single, calm field. The night deepens gently. Not darker, just quieter. Everything slows another step, easing into stillness. Thoughts continue to blur, losing their edges completely. There's no clear beginning or end to any of them now. They pass through like soft waves, overlapping and fading. The mind doesn't resist this dot. It no longer tries to pull thoughts apart or examine them. It allows them to exist briefly, then fade without comment. Silence becomes more noticeable now, filling the spaces between blurred impressions. It doesn't feel empty. It feels complete, like the natural state beneath all activity. The body responds by sinking deeper into rest. Weight feels heavier, more grounded. There's no urge to move or adjust. Everything feels settled. Breathing remains steady and unremarkable. You don't need to notice it. It continues quietly on its own. Thoughts are now so soft that they barely register. When one does appear, it blends immediately into the background. There's no moment where it stands alone. The mind rests more often in quiet than in thought. The story fades further into the background, becoming part of the overall hum of the night. Words blur slightly, registering more as sound than meaning. Listening becomes optional. Time continues to lose its shape. There's no sense of waiting for the next thing to happen. The night unfolds without direction or urgency. Thoughts have lost their individuality entirely now. What remains is a general sense of mental movement, slow and diffuse, like clouds blending together in a dark sky. This feels easy. The mind no longer feels busy. It feels occupied only lightly, without effort. There's nothing to manage, nothing to resolve. The room remains unchanged. Darkness holds steady. Nothing interrupts this gentle blending. Silence grows fuller, wrapping softly around awareness. It doesn't push thoughts away. It simply remains when they don't stay. The story continues calmly, but it feels distant now, like something happening elsewhere. You don't need to stay with it. It will remain whether you're aware of it or not. Awareness drifts gently within this softened space. There's no clear boundary between thinking and resting. The two begin to merge. Thoughts become rare and faint. When one appears, it dissolves almost immediately, leaving quiet behind. The mind doesn't comment on this change. It doesn't need to. The night stays patient. Everything slows another step. Sensations soften. Sounds blur. Presence becomes diffuse. There's no need to notice when this happens. It unfolds quietly, without announcement. The body remains still. Breathing remains steady. Nothing asks for attention. And as thoughts continue to blur and overlap, no longer standing apart or asking to be followed, awareness begins to drift more freely, preparing to settle into longer pauses where nothing needs to form at all. And as thoughts lose their edges completely, Gentle spaces begin to open between them. Quiet pauses where the mind can rest without needing to think. Quiet pauses where the mind can rest without needing to think. The pauses don't arrive with any announcement. They slip in gently, almost unnoticed, settling between thoughts like soft gaps in a familiar rhythm. At first, they're brief, just long enough to be felt, then they widen slightly, staying a moment longer each time. Nothing rushes in to replace them. A thought appears, then fades, and instead of another thought following immediately, there's space. The mind notices it only after it's already there. A quiet moment, unfilled and unhurried. This space feels comfortable. The night welcomes these pauses easily. It doesn't treat them as interruptions. It holds them steady, letting them remain without pressure. The room stays quiet and unchanged, offering no reason for the mind to re-engage. Breathing continues softly in the background. Each breath creates a small space of its own, a gentle rise and fall with nothing in between that needs attention. The rhythm remains calm and dependable. Thoughts still arrive from time to time, but they no longer crowd each other. One passes through, then leaves behind a pause before another appears. The mind doesn't hurry to close that gap. It allows it to remain open. These pauses don't feel empty. They feel like rest. The body responds by settling further. Weight spreads evenly. Muscles remain loose and unmoving. Sensation softens, becoming less detailed, less insistent. The story continues quietly alongside this calm, its presence steady but unobtrusive. Words drift through without urgency. You don't need to follow them closely. They can pass by just like thoughts do. Listening becomes lighter. The mind begins to recognize these pauses as safe. It no longer feels the need to fill every moment with activity. It rests there naturally, without effort or instruction. Time feels different now. There's no sense of waiting for the next thought. There's no anticipation. Moments simply unfold, one after another, without being measured. Thoughts appear less often. When one does arrive, it seems aware that it doesn't need to stay long. It passes through gently, then leaves the pause intact behind it. The night holds this rhythm patiently. The room remains unchanged. Darkness stays soft and even. Shadows don't move. Nothing interrupts the quiet. Pauses grow longer now. They stretch comfortably, offering more room for the mind to rest. Silence becomes more noticeable, not as an absence, but as a presence steady and reassuring. The body remains deeply at rest. There's no urge to adjust or respond. Everything feels supported, grounded. Breathing continues on its own, smooth and unremarkable. You don't need to notice it. It happens whether you're aware of it or not. Thoughts grow thinner. When one appears, it feels distant and light, as though it's happening somewhere else. It doesn't pull attention. It dissolves easily, leaving quiet behind. The mind doesn't call it back. The story fades slightly into the background now. Words register more as sound than meaning. Listening becomes something that happens occasionally. Without intention, the pauses between thoughts begin to blend together. Instead of brief gaps, there are longer stretches where nothing arrives at all. These moments don't feel empty. They feel complete, like the mind has found a place to rest. Awareness drifts gently within them. The night deepens quietly. Not darker, just calmer. Everything slows another step, easing into stillness. Thoughts are now infrequent. When one appears, it passes through quickly, barely forming before it fades. The pause that follows feels more substantial than the thought itself. The mind rests there without comment. Time loses more of its shape. There's no sense of how long these pauses last. The night doesn't keep track, and neither does the mind. The body remains still. Breathing remains steady. Nothing asks for attention. Silence grows fuller now, wrapping softly around awareness. It doesn't push thoughts away. It simply remains when they don't stay. The story continues calmly, but it feels distant, like something happening elsewhere. You don't need to stay with it. It will remain whether you listen or not. Pauses continue to lengthen. They arrive more easily now, staying longer, leaving the mind resting quietly without effort. Thinking no longer fills the space automatically. It appears only occasionally, then slips away again. The mind feels comfortable here. There's no need to decide whether to think or rest. Both happen naturally, without guidance. The night carries everything along gently. Thoughts have lost their urgency entirely. They don't rush in. They don't demand attention. They appear only when there's energy left for them. And even then, they don't stay long. The pauses become the dominant experience. Awareness settles into them easily, without trying to hold on to anything. It floats lightly, unanchored and calm. The room remains unchanged. Darkness holds steady. Nothing interrupts the quiet. The story continues softly, its presence steady and reassuring, even as listening fades in and out. The mind no longer tries to manage itself. It allows the rhythm of thought and pause to unfold on its own, trusting the night to handle the rest. And as these pauses grow more familiar and more inviting, thoughts begin to arrive more slowly still, staying for less time, easing naturally into a quieter pace where rest begins to take over. And as the spaces between thoughts widen and settle, ideas begin to slow on their own, arriving gently and leaving just as easily, without needing to be followed. Arriving gently and leaving just as easily, without needing to be followed. There's a noticeable ease now in the way thoughts appear. They no longer push their way in or demand attention. Instead, they arrive softly, almost politely, as if checking whether there's room before settling in. And when they do settle, it's only for a moment. The mind doesn't work as hard anymore. Thinking still happens, but with less effort behind it. Ideas don't press forward. They don't insist on being explored. They pause briefly, then move on, leaving the quiet exactly as they found it. This lighter rhythm feels natural. The night supports it without interruption. The room remains unchanged, calm and still, offering no reason for the mind to sharpen itself again. Darkness stays even and soft, smoothing everything it touches. Breathing continues steadily in the background. Each breath flows easily into the next, unremarkable and dependable. You don't need to guide it. It has found its own pace. Thoughts appear less often now. When one does arrive, it feels faint, almost unfinished. It doesn't spark a chain or pull another thought along with it. It simply passes through, then fades. The mind allows this without comment. There's no longer an urge to analyze or review. The habit of examining thoughts feels distant, unnecessary. Ideas don't invite scrutiny. They don't stay long enough to be examined anyway. The body remains deeply at rest. Weight feels settled and evenly supported. Muscles stay relaxed, unmoving. Sensation continues to soften, becoming less detailed and less demanding. Time feels especially gentle here. There's no sense of waiting or moving forward. Moments unfold quietly, without being counted or measured. The story continues softly alongside this calm, its presence steady but unobtrusive. Words arrive slowly and leave without leaving much behind. Listening happens without effort, drifting in and out naturally. Thinking grows even lighter. Thoughts that do appear now feel distant, as if they're happening somewhere slightly removed. You're aware of them without being involved. They don't feel personal or urgent. They dissolve easily. The night holds this distance patiently. The room remains quiet and unchanged. Shadows don't move. Nothing shifts or reacts. This stillness reassures the mind that it doesn't need to stay alert. Breathing remains steady, almost unnoticed. Each breath seems to create more space, more quiet, without asking for attention. Thoughts slow further. Instead of arriving in pairs or chains, they appear one at a time, with long spaces between them. Sometimes nothing arrives at all, and the mind rests comfortably in that absence. These spaces feel welcoming. Silence becomes the main experience now. It doesn't feel like a pause between thoughts. It feels like a place the mind is settled into, calm and complete. The story fades slightly into the background, becoming less distinct. Words blur into sound. Meaning matters less than tone and rhythm. Listening becomes optional. The mind no longer tries to stay active. It doesn't search for thoughts to fill the quiet. It allows whatever happens to happen, without interference. Thoughts that do appear are brief and light. They don't linger. They don't repeat. They leave quietly, without disrupting the calm. The body sinks deeper into rest. Weight feels heavier, more grounded. There's no urge to move or adjust. Everything feels settled and safe. Time continues to lose its shape. There's no awareness of how long you've been here, or how long you'll remain. The night doesn't mark progress. The room stays the same. Darkness remains soft and even. Nothing calls attention back. Thinking has become almost effortless now. When it happens, it feels automatic and gentle, without strain. When it doesn't happen, the mind doesn't notice its absence. This ease spreads quietly. Awareness floats lightly within the calm, no longer anchored to thoughts or sounds. It moves gently, without direction or purpose. The story remains present, but distant, like a familiar sound heard from another room. It continues whether you listen or not. Thoughts are now rare. When one appears, it fades almost immediately, leaving quiet behind. There's no attempt to hold on to it. The mind rests easily here. Silence grows fuller, wrapping softly around awareness. It doesn't push thoughts away. It simply remains when they don't stay. The night deepens quietly, without announcement. Everything slows another step, easing into stillness. The body remains still. Breathing remains steady. Nothing interrupts this gentle unwinding. Thinking no longer feels important. It no longer feels necessary. It happens only when there's energy left for it. And even then, it doesn't stay long. The pauses between thoughts stretch comfortably. They begin to blend together, forming longer moments of quiet where nothing arrives at all. Awareness drifts softly within these moments. The story continues calmly, but it feels increasingly remote. Words pass through without forming clearly. Sound and silence begin to blend together. The mind doesn't try to separate them. Rest settles in more fully now. There's nothing left to manage, nothing left to resolve. Everything feels complete as it is. And as thinking continues to require less and less effort, awareness itself begins to loosen further, growing lighter and less involved, ready to drift toward a quieter, more distant state of rest. And as mental effort fades almost completely, interest in thinking begins to slip away, allowing awareness to soften and drift without needing to stay engaged. Allowing awareness to soften and drift without needing to stay engaged. There's a quiet change now, subtle and unannounced. The mind hasn't shut down, but it no longer feels invested in what it's doing. Thoughts still surface occasionally, but they arrive without the pull they once had. They don't ask to be followed. They don't ask to be finished. Interest has begun to fade. A thought may appear briefly, then pass through without leaving much behind. It doesn't spark curiosity. It doesn't invite attention. It simply comes and goes, like a sound heard from far away. The mind doesn't chase it. Awareness feels lighter now, less attached. It no longer leans forward, trying to stay involved. It rests back gently, content to let things happen without commentary. The night supports this distance quietly. The room remains unchanged, calm and still. Darkness holds everything evenly, offering no detail that asks to be noticed. Breathing continues softly in the background. It's steady and unremarkable, blending into the quiet. You don't need to pay attention to it. It happens whether you notice or not. Thoughts grow even less frequent. When one does appear, it feels faint, almost unfinished. It doesn't form clearly enough to matter. It fades quickly, leaving the quiet intact. The mind doesn't mind. The story continues, but it feels farther away now. Words arrive as sound more than meaning. You may catch a phrase here and there, or you may not. Either way, nothing important is missed. Listening has become optional. Awareness drifts gently, slipping in and out of focus without effort. There may be moments when it fades entirely, returning later without announcement. These shifts feel unimportant, barely noticeable. The night carries everything along patiently. Time feels especially soft here. There's no sense of progression, no awareness of how long anything has been happening. Moments blend together, forming a calm stretch without edges. Thoughts are now rare and distant. When they appear, they feel like echoes rather than clear voices. They don't pull attention. They dissolve easily. The body remains deeply at rest. Weight feels settled and evenly supported. Muscles stay relaxed and unmoving. Sensation has faded into the background, becoming less defined. Awareness grows lighter still. It no longer anchors itself to thoughts or sounds. It floats gently, without direction or purpose. This drifting feels familiar. The night seems to take the lead now, guiding everything without instruction. There's no need to stay alert. There's nothing left to manage. Silence fills the spaces easily. It doesn't feel like a pause between things. It feels like the natural state beneath everything else. The story remains present, but distant, like a sound heard from another room. It continues steadily, unconcerned with whether it's being heard. Thoughts have almost entirely stopped forming. What remains is a soft sense of awareness, barely held, barely noticed. Even that begins to thin. Breathing continues somewhere in the background. The body rests fully. Nothing shifts or interrupts. Awareness drifts further now, slipping easily between presence and rest. The boundary between the two becomes difficult to tell. There's no clear line where one ends, and the other begins. The mind doesn't comment on this change. It doesn't need to. The night deepens quietly. Everything slows another step, easing into stillness. There's no announcement, no moment to mark. The story feels even farther away now, almost indistinguishable from the quiet. Words blend into silence. Sound softens until it's barely there. Awareness loosens its grip entirely. There's nothing left to hold on to, and no need to try. Thoughts are gone now, or so faint they're indistinguishable from the quiet itself. The mind rests without effort, without direction. The night holds everything gently. Interest in thinking has faded completely. There's no curiosity left to pull attention back. Awareness remains light, unanchored, content to drift. The body stays still. Breathing remains steady. Nothing asks for attention. Silence feels full and reassuring, wrapping softly around what little remains of awareness. It doesn't push anything away. It simply stays. The story continues calmly in the background, but it no longer feels separate from the quiet. Sound and silence blend together, becoming part of the same gentle field. Awareness grows thinner now, less distinct. It drifts without noticing, without effort, without concern. The night remains steady and patient. There's no sense of arrival, no moment where anything clearly changes. Everything simply continues to soften, to slow, to fade. The story stays. The quiet stays. And as interest in overthinking slips away entirely, awareness continues to thin and soften, preparing to drift even farther, leaving the night to carry everything the rest of the way. And as awareness grows quieter and less defined, listening itself begins to fade, while the night continues calmly on its own, unhurried and complete. While the night continues calmly on its own, unhurried and complete, awareness feels different now. Not absent, just distant, as though it has stepped quietly to the side. The mind is still present somewhere, but it no longer feels responsible for noticing or keeping track. There's nothing left to monitor, nothing left to hold in place. Thoughts are almost entirely gone now. When one appears, it's faint and unfinished, like a ripple that barely forms before disappearing. It doesn't arrive as a sentence or an image. It passes through as a soft impression and leaves without asking to be. Remembered. This feels natural. The night has settled fully. Not with a change you can point to, but with a deepening stillness that surrounds everything. The room remains quiet and unchanged, though even that feels distant now, like something happening far away. The body rests completely. Weight feels evenly spread, grounded and unmoving. There's no urge to shift or adjust. Muscles remain loose, content to stay exactly where they are. Breathing continues somewhere in the background. It no longer stands out as a sensation. Each breath blends seamlessly into the next, forming a slow, steady rhythm that doesn't require awareness. The story continues, but it feels very far away now. Words may still be present, but they don't form clearly. Some register only a sound. Others fade before they're noticed at all. Meaning is no longer necessary. Listening has quietly let go. Awareness drifts in and out without effort. There may be moments when it disappears entirely, returning briefly without announcement. These shifts feel unimportant, barely noticed. Nothing depends on them. Time has lost all shape here. There's no sense of before, after, no awareness of how long anything has been happening. The night doesn't measure itself. Thoughts no longer form. What remains is a soft, indistinct sense of being, barely held, barely noticed. Even that begins to thin. Silence fills everything easily. It doesn't feel empty. It feels complete, like a natural state beneath all activity. The mind rests within it without effort. The story remains present, but distant, like a sound heard through walls. It continues steadily, unconcerned with whether it's being heard. You don't need to stay with it. It will remain whether awareness is there or not. Awareness fades further now. The edges soften until it's difficult to tell where awareness ends and rest begins. The two blend together, becoming indistinguishable. There's no moment of transition, no clear shift. Everything simply grows quieter, slower, less defined. The night carries everything gently. It doesn't hurry the process. It allows awareness to loosen at its own pace, slipping gradually into rest without resistance. The body remains still. Breathing remains steady. Nothing interrupts this calm. Thoughts are gone now, or so faint they're indistinguishable from silence itself. There's no interest in forming them. There's no energy left for thinking. Even the idea of listening has faded. His story continues softly in the background, but it no longer feels separate from the quiet. Sound and silence blend together, becoming part of the same gentle field. Awareness drifts further away, no longer anchored to words, sensations, or time. There's nothing left to hold on to, and nothing left to let go of. This feels familiar, like a place you visited many times before without remembering it clearly. A place where effort isn't required, where nothing needs to be monitored or maintained. The night deepens quietly. Not darker, just softer. Everything settles further, easing into stillness. There is no sense of arrival, no final moment. Everything simply continues to slow, to soften, to fade. The story stays steady and calm, even as awareness slips away. It doesn't mind being unheard. It doesn't need acknowledgement. Breathing continues somewhere in the background. The body rests fully. The mind no longer comments. Nothing is being asked of you now. The night has finished the work gently, without interruption, without announcement. Awareness thins to a quiet trace, and less than that, then something barely there at all. The story stays. The night stays, and everything else drifts quietly out of view. And whether you're still listening or not, the night continues calmly on its own, holding the quiet exactly as it is.